Imagine this. You're standing in a vast, empty room. There are no windows, no clocks, just four smooth gray walls pressing in around you. In front of you lies a mirror, not just any mirror, but one that doesn't reflect your physical body. Instead, it reveals something stranger. Fragments of your choices, stitched together like a collage of ghosts. Every betrayal you've committed, every lie you've told, every time you looked away when someone needed help, hovering behind your reflection, silent and vivid. You want to look away, but you can't, because the mirror shows something else, something worse. It shows how many of those betrayals were inevitable, how many of them were not accidents, not lapses, but patterns, symptoms of something deeper embedded in you, not taught, not learned, inherited. You step back, heart racing. Is this what it means to be human? And then it hits you. Maybe some parts of you are not entirely yours. Maybe some of your instincts were forged long before you were born, before your name, your story, or your sense of self even existed. Maybe the darkest parts of your nature, the envy you hide, the need for approval that corrodes your soul, the hunger for power even in harmless moments, aren't malfunctions. What if they're features? What if the very things you resent in yourself are not deviations from humanity, but expressions of it? From a young age, you're told you're special, that you're free, that you can be anything you choose if you just try hard enough. But what if the truth is far colder? What if much of your behavior isn't driven by free will at all, but by primitive scripts, written into your biology, encrypted into your psychology, reinforced by culture, then mistaken for choice? What if, beneath your carefully constructed identity, there's a machine, greedy, insecure, reactive, and you spend your entire life trying to pretend it's not there? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Let that echo in your mind for a moment. You can choose the fruit, yes, but can you choose your craving? You can pick your career, but can you pick your desire for status? You can apologize for your temper, but can you erase the part of you that gets triggered in the first place? And if you can't, then who exactly are you? There's a reason betrayal hurts more than physical pain. There's a reason love turns to resentment with eerie speed. There's a reason some people thrive in cruelty and others turn silent while injustice unfolds. But it's not just about others. It's about you. Why do you remember insults more vividly than praise? Why does watching someone else succeed make a part of you shrink? Why do you crave belonging, and yet sabotage relationships when they get too close? These aren't just questions, they are keys. Keys to a door most people will never open because the truth behind it is too honest, too unflattering, too real. You are not who you think you are, at least not entirely. Behind the mask of kindness, behind the social filters, behind your authentic self, lies something much older, an ancient architecture of fear, dominance, mimicry, and survival. And here's the cruel twist. The very society that taught you to be good, kind, and humble was built by people who exploited these flaws in human nature, who understood how easy it was to manipulate those ancient instincts for power, profit, or control. So, where does that leave you? Are you a conscious being trying to overcome your nature? Or are you simply a puppet with the illusion of strings in your hands? There are three harsh truths about human nature that most people will never face. Not because they're hidden, but because they're obvious, and yet too disturbing to accept. They're not whispered in secret books or buried in ancient ruins. They're right there, in your conversations, in your relationships, in your habits, in the small moments when you think no one is watching. These truths will not comfort you, they will not flatter you, but they will set you free, if you're ready to see yourself not as you wish to be, but as you are. The question is, can you handle the truth about what it means to be human? Can you peer into that mirror and not look away? Because once we move beyond this room, once we start peeling back the skin of human nature, We won't find the angel we hoped to become. We may find something darker, but maybe, just maybe, in that darkness we'll also find clarity. Now, are you ready to see what lies beneath the surface? Let's open the first layer. So, you've looked into the mirror. You saw the flickers of envy behind a friend's success, the silent delight when a rival stumbled, the lies you told, not to deceive others but to protect your carefully constructed identity. You saw them all, and something within you whispered, "This isn't a glitch. This is who you are." But let's dig deeper. Not into morality, not into good or bad. Let's go further, into the furnace where this self was forged, because there is a hidden architecture beneath your behavior, a scaffolding built not on logic or reason, but on raw, ancient emotion. And to understand it, we must first ask, why do we suffer from our own nature? Why does being human feel like constantly battling against ourselves? To answer that, we need to descend into the psychological basement of the human soul. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological minds of the last century, spoke often about the shadow, the rejected, unconscious parts of ourselves we pretend don't exist. Not because we're ashamed of them, but because we're afraid of them. Your kindness, often a mask for your need to be accepted. Your ambition, frequently rooted in unhealed inferiority. Your love, sometimes more about possession than connection. These contradictions don't mean you're a hypocrite. They mean you're human. Jung believed that to become whole, you must integrate your shadow, make peace with the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life disowning. But society doesn't reward shadow work. It rewards performance. So you build a persona, an ideal version of yourself, and you feed it to the world. Slowly, day by day, that performance hardens into identity. The mask becomes your face, and in doing so, you lose sight of what's underneath. Now, let's bring in Nietzsche. He didn't believe in original sin, but he did believe in inherited weakness, the kind that's passed not through blood, but through beliefs. For Nietzsche, the greatest tragedy wasn't that people were evil, it was that people were small, afraid of their own potential, willing to be tamed by systems, ideologies, and false moralities that comforted them rather than challenged them. He called it the slave morality, the mindset of those who resented power, achievement, and strength because they had none of their own. Sound familiar? Every time you shrink yourself to fit in, every time you mock someone for being too ambitious, too intense, too confident, every time you indulge in victimhood to avoid responsibility, you're feeding that same ancient mechanism, survival through submission. You don't want the truth. You want safety. You don't want freedom. You want approval. That's the hidden problem. Most people would rather be accepted than awake. And that preference, that quiet, unconscious willingness to trade authenticity for comfort, isn't accidental. It's hardwired. Let's go back even further, to the oldest layers of the brain, the limbic system, the reptilian core, the parts of you that evolved not to think, but to react. Your brain doesn't care about truth. It cares about survival. So it creates shortcuts, heuristics, biases, patterns. You meet someone new. Within milliseconds, your brain classifies them: threat or ally, dominant or submissive, useful or irrelevant. You walk into a room and instinctively position yourself. Am I higher or lower in the social hierarchy? You scroll through social media and feel a pang of inadequacy, not because the person is better than you, but because their display of status triggers ancient competition modules in your brain. This isn't narcissism. This isn't insecurity. This is evolution at work. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors survived by sensing threats, reading power dynamics, and copying those who appeared stronger. These instincts didn't disappear, they just put on a suit. Modern life is nothing but the Stone Age in high definition. But here's where it gets more disturbing. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free. What he meant was, we have no excuse. We're not just machines. We're aware. We know we're acting out patterns, and yet we do it anyway. You know when you're lying, when you're posturing, when you're manipulating someone. You know, and yet you go through with it. Why? Because even awareness isn't strong enough to overcome the gravitational pull of human nature. You've seen it in others. That friend who always needs validation. The coworker who sabotages others just to feel in control. The parent who uses guilt instead of love. But do you see it in yourself? Do you see how you use kindness as currency? Do you notice how your compassion sometimes hides judgment? Do you realize that your need to help others is occasionally just a veiled attempt to feel superior? It's not shameful, it's inevitable. And unless you understand why, unless you name the forces pulling your strings, you'll never be free. Here's the most bitter truth. Your mind lies to you. Not occasionally, not when it's tired, constantly. It creates narratives, justifications, stories that make you the hero. It hides your worst intentions beneath good intentions. It rebrands your self-interest as morality. And, worst of all, it believes its own lies. Because the alternative is too painful. Admitting you are not in full control. Admitting your conscious self is a thin veil over a raging ocean of unconscious drives. As Aldous Huxley once said, the propagandist's purpose is to make one set of people forget that certain other sets of people are human. But the deeper problem is this: you do it to yourself. You dehumanize your own darkness. You exile parts of yourself into the shadows, then wonder why you feel hollow. So now we begin to see the picture. You're not weak because you struggle with yourself. You struggle because you're not fighting a habit. You're fighting millions of years of evolution. You're wrestling with the ghost of survival, still living inside your bloodstream. But we're not done yet. Because if these instincts run so deep, what are they doing to your world? What do they cost you? Not just internally, but externally. You might think the consequences are personal, but they're not. They're structural, cultural, generational. They shape your career, your love life, your society. And unless you see those consequences clearly, you'll stay locked in a prison you can't see and can't escape. You wake up, check your phone. Notifications flood your screen like anxious spirits, each one demanding your attention, each one feeding the illusion that you matter because you're visible. You scroll, you compare, you wince at a vacation photo from someone richer, prettier, younger. You tap on it anyway. Your nervous system registers it as a threat, but you call it entertainment. The day begins, and you have no idea that something ancient, invisible, and ruthless is guiding your every step. Not society, something quieter, something older, your own nature. Because what you've inherited from evolution, trauma, and culture is not just a set of tendencies. It's a system, and this system has consequences. Let's start with your perception of the truth. You like to believe you're a rational being, that you form beliefs based on facts, evidence, and reason. But neuroscience tells a darker tale. Your brain isn't designed to find the truth. It's designed to avoid pain. Cognitive biases like confirmation bias ensure that once you believe something about the world, yourself, or someone else, you subconsciously filter out any information that contradicts it. You create a feedback loop of illusions. You don't seek knowledge, you seek reassurance. You think you're curious, but what you really want is validation. This is why it's so easy to live inside ideological bubbles. Why you keep following the same types of people, reading the same kinds of posts, consuming the same style of content. Your shadow doesn't just control your feelings, it shapes your reality. Now let's talk about relationships. You say you want love, connection, understanding, but in practice, you want control. You want to be seen, but only in the ways that make you feel desirable. You want intimacy, but not the kind that exposes your inadequacies. And so your relationships become performance stages. You curate your image. You monitor your partner's reactions like a social scientist. You test them. You punish them for not being your fantasy. This is the commodification of love, where people are no longer people but tools for emotional regulation. You don't just fear rejection. You engineer your interactions to avoid it at the cost of honesty. That smile, practiced, that compliment, strategic, that vulnerability, timed for maximum reward, and still, you feel unseen. Why? Because no one can love the mask, but you never let them near what's behind it. This doesn't just play out in romance. It governs your career, your friendships, your ambitions. In the modern world, your worth is often measured by how well you perform an identity. You're not hired because you're real. You're hired because you're palatable. You're not followed because you're wise. You're followed because you're stimulating. And in that ecosystem, authenticity becomes a liability. So you adapt. You play roles. You brand yourself. You monetize your persona until you even forget who you were before the performance began. You tell yourself this is freedom, but it's not freedom. It's invisible conformity. Let's go even broader. Zoom out to the societal level. Because when millions of people deny their shadows, something horrifying happens. We project them. We create others to carry what we can't face in ourselves. Entire political ideologies are built not on reasoned beliefs, but on psychological projection, where we cast our inner fears, desires, and insecurities onto those who are different. The poor become lazy. The rich become evil. The foreign become threats. The opposition becomes inhuman. And when we've dehumanized the other side, morally, intellectually, or spiritually, violence becomes justified. Not just physical violence, but verbal, emotional, cultural. Every us versus them system is just shadow projection scaled up. History repeats not because people forget, but because people refuse to look within. Think of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, a dystopia not of suffering, but of sedation. No wars, no famine, no terror, just a distraction, pleasure, control disguised as freedom. That's what happens when you design a world to keep people from ever confronting their true nature. And the tragedy, it works. People become so overstimulated they forget how to feel. So entertained they forget how to think. So safe they forget how to live. And the machine continues. Fueled by dopamine, fueled by fear, fueled by people who would rather scroll than awaken. But what's the cost? The cost is aliveness. That feeling you had as a child when time slowed down and wonder was still possible. Gone. Replaced by mild anxiety, endless comparison, and a desperate need to be seen by people who don't know you. The cost is the truth. Your mind, built to lie to you, is reinforced by an environment that rewards those lies. Every time you're tempted to speak your truth and you stay silent to be liked. Every time you know something is wrong but pretend it's fine. Every time you feel empty but call it normal. You're not surviving. You're disappearing. And perhaps the greatest cost of all? Meaning. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." That's the final consequence of human nature left unchecked. A slow erosion of purpose. You chase thrills instead of growth, validation instead of transformation. And in doing so, you become a ghost, alive in body, dead in spirit. So here you are, wired for survival, surrounded by distractions, conditioned to conform, and afraid of your own depths. And now you know. You've seen the trap. It was never outside you. It was inside your nervous system, your upbringing, your culture, your ego. But knowing isn't enough. You must choose to stay sedated or to rebel, because there is a rebellion. A radical, dangerous, soul-altering rebellion against everything you've been trained to believe. And it begins not with action, but with awareness. You don't escape the trap by running faster. You escape by seeing it for what it is, and choosing differently. Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind you is the world you know, the safe, familiar rhythm of your illusions, the curated version of your life, the carefully maintained identities, the predictable pains and pleasures you've become addicted to. In front of you, a vast unknown. No signs, no guarantees. Just a strange silence, almost sacred. You feel the pull of gravity, not the kind that drags you down, but the one that pulls your soul forward, toward truth, toward freedom, toward a version of yourself you've never fully met. And then the most unexpected realization lands. No one is coming to save you. No mentor, no system. At least not in the way you imagined. If you want to break free, you will have to betray the version of yourself that survives by pleasing, performing, and pretending. That's the rebellion, and it begins now. But what does rebellion actually look like? Not screaming into the void, not setting fire to your job or cutting off your family. That's just a reaction, not a revolution. The real rebellion is internal and far more difficult. It starts with radical honesty. You sit with yourself, no distractions, no justifications, no masks, and you ask, where am I lying? Where am I pretending to be happy when I'm not? Where am I staying silent to be accepted? Where am I doing what's expected instead of what's real? This is not a self-help exercise. This is a surgical confrontation with the false self you've built to survive. And it will hurt, because every illusion you let go of feels like a death. But that's how you're reborn. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of your unconscious shadow into your conscious life. It's not about becoming good, it's about becoming whole. You reclaim the rejected parts, your rage, your lust, your grief, your envy. Not to indulge them, but to own them. Because what you don't own will own you. You see, society trains you to be half a person, to disown your darkness, to be agreeable, nice, tame. But wholeness means making peace with the animal in you and the divine. Your rebellion begins the moment you say, I will no longer amputate parts of myself to be loved. Next comes the rejection of borrowed beliefs. How many of your opinions are actually yours? Look closely. Your definition of success? Probably inherited. Your sense of morality? Conditioned. Your political ideology? A mix of trauma, tribe, and algorithms. The rebellion requires you to disassemble your inner architecture, to take every belief you hold and ask, where did this come from? Who benefits from me believing this? And what would I believe if I were truly free? This is not easy. You may feel untethered, lost, alone, but it's the price of sovereignty. You're not becoming someone else. You're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Then comes the most terrifying act of rebellion, slowing down. In a world addicted to speed, stillness is heresy. When you stop distracting yourself, when you truly sit with yourself, you begin to hear the quiet voice beneath the noise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It whispers, and it says things you've avoided for years. Like, this job is killing your soul. Or, you're not in love anymore. Or, you were meant for something else. The moment you begin listening to that voice, you are no longer a cog in the machine. You're a spark of rebellion. Rebellion is not always grand. Sometimes it's as simple as not replying right away, or turning your phone off for an entire day, or writing something you'll never publish, or crying without apologizing for it. It's saying no to the things that once defined you. It's embracing silence when the world demands noise. It's looking in the mirror and seeing not a brand or a role, but a being, one that is vast, imperfect, and unspeakably sacred. There are those who walked this path before you. Frankl, who found meaning in the horrors of a concentration camp. Sartre, who rejected all inherited meaning and said, "We are condemned to be free." These weren't just philosophers. They were rebels of the soul. And like you, they were terrified. But they chose truth over comfort. And that made all the difference. So now the question is, will you choose the same? Will you let go of the applause? Will you stop explaining your transformation to people who never cared to understand you? Will you risk being misunderstood, even abandoned, just to live as you actually are? Because the rebellion comes with losses. You will outgrow people. You will disappoint others. You will grieve the person you used to be, but you will gain something far more powerful. Your life. Not the scripted version, not the optimized, marketable version. Your life. Messy, unsure, fierce, beautiful, real. And then, one day, it happens. You wake up, not in a rush, not in panic. You just breathe. You open your eyes, and for the first time in years, you don't feel like you're behind, or not enough, or chasing something invisible. You feel here, alive, not perfect, not enlightened, but I'm awake. You've stepped out of the story you were sold, and into the mystery you were born for. That is the rebellion. And it doesn't end here, because even deeper than rebellion lies the final truth. A truth so profound, so elemental, that when you see it, truly see it, your entire view of reality shifts. You've peeled back the layers. You've seen how fear shapes desire, how survival drives conformity, how we build cages and convince ourselves they're castles. You've recognized the patterns, the loops, the lies we tell ourselves to function. But even now, after all the reflection, all the breakthroughs, there's one more truth left, and it's the hardest to accept. Because it doesn't just reframe your behavior, it rewrites the entire architecture of who you think you are. It's not loud, it doesn't announce itself with fireworks or divine light. It comes in quietly, like a glitch in the software of your mind. And suddenly, everything freezes. You notice it in the strangest of places, standing in the shower, staring at a street lamp, listening to someone talk and realizing you're not really there. There's a flicker, a pause, a question not from your mouth but from some uncharted depth within you. Who am I when no one is watching? The answer, no one. And not in a dramatic, poetic way, but in the most literal, clinical sense possible. Psychologically speaking, the self you cling to, defend, and build your life around is a constructed illusion. You don't have a self. You have a narrative, a constantly evolving mental model created by the brain to maintain cohesion between your memories, preferences, habits, and goals. This isn't just philosophy. It's neuroscience. As neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has shown, the self is not a singular entity but a process, an orchestration of different brain regions constructing a continuity of experience. There is no central you sitting in your head pulling levers. There is only interpretation. Each thought, each memory, each belief you've formed, stitched together to create what Daniel Dennett calls the center of narrative gravity. Not a soul, not a being, just a psychological point of reference. You are not the story. You are the storyteller. This is why you feel fragmented, why you can be so many different people in different situations, why your inner monologue changes tone depending on who's in the room, or what you're afraid of, or what you're trying to prove. It's not because you're fake. It's because the self is not fixed. It's adaptive, and often reactive. As Carl Rogers noted, much of human suffering arises when there's a gap between who we are and who we think we should be. The ideal self versus the actual self. But what happens when you realize both of them, ideal and actual, are constructions? What happens when you recognize that the person you spend your life defending doesn't even exist in a stable, objective way? At first, there's terror. It's like the floor disappears beneath your identity. But then, if you don't flinch, comes something else, something liberating. You realize, if there is no fixed self to protect, then there is no failure that can define you. No past that can imprison you. No role you must play. You become a fluid system, not a trapped character in a script, but an evolving organism, free to shift, reinvent, rewire. This is what modern psychology means when it talks about neuroplasticity. Your mind is not a rigid machine. It's a living, learning network. The core illusion is permanence. But your personality? It shifts with context. Your memories? They mutate every time you recall them. Your beliefs? They're shaped more by emotion than reason, and more by your social environment than personal logic. This is not an attack on your identity. It's the gateway to psychological freedom. Because if the self is a narrative, then that narrative can be revised, radically, and you don't have to wait for permission. But this brings us to the true challenge. If there is no one you, then who's responsible for your choices? If everything is malleable, what anchors your values? This is where existential psychology steps in. Frankl, Sartre, May, and others. They didn't deny the instability of the self. They embraced it and said, this is the price of freedom. To be human is to have no fixed essence. You are not born with purpose. You create it. You don't discover who you are. You choose it over and over again, moment by moment. You craft a self by how you respond to chaos, not by avoiding it. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Not to find your true self, but to become something through your choices. The ultimate truth isn't that you're lost, it's that you were never found to begin with. And that's not a curse. It's power. Think of it this way. The brain is a prediction machine. It doesn't perceive reality. It models it. It takes in scattered data from the senses and constructs what you think is the world and what you think is you. But this model is built from habit, memory, trauma, culture. It's not true. It's probability, which means you can interrupt it, reprogram it, transform it. Not through affirmation or fantasy, but through raw awareness, noticing the loop, naming the story, then writing something new. Not better, not perfect, but real. So what now? You step into your life without the need for certainty. You stop obsessing over authenticity, because authenticity is a moving target. You stop trying to find yourself and instead begin designing yourself. Not from pressure, not from shame, but from the realization that you are not a noun. You are a verb, and every action you take, every word you speak is the birth of a new you. You become responsible, not for being perfect, but for being aware. You become accountable, not to the past, but to possibility. And when someone asks, "Who are you really?" you don't need to answer, because you're not a puzzle to solve. You're a process unfolding. And the most powerful thing you can do is choose what comes next.